Good afternoon, and welcome to our National Visioning Session, Back to School After COVID-19, Supporting Student and Staff Mental Health, with CEI Executive Director, Dr. Christine Mason, Executive Director of the Michigan Elementary and Middle School Principals Association, Paul Libano, and Principal of Upper Providence Elementary School, Dr. Melissa Patchke. My name is Dana Asby, and I will be your webinar manager and host. Today's meeting will last approximately 1.5 hours. Microphones will be muted during the presentation. At designated times, for example, during our question and answer session, you can use the raise your hand feature to request an open mic. When speaking, be sure to eliminate background noise. Thanks to a partnership with C4 Innovations, we're offering 1 hour of continuing education credit for participation in this webinar. We can also offer you a certificate of participation. For record-keeping purposes, you must identify yourself while on the meeting platform using your first and last name or email address. You can either ensure your name appears as part of your video panel or enter it in the chat box. Registration affirms your consent to receive an evaluation follow-up link via email and your consent to recording. If you experience any technical issues, please send a private chat message to Ingrid Paget, our technical support manager for today's webinar. We're pleased that you joined this webinar, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Mason's co-authors, Paul Libano, Executive Director of the Michigan Elementary School Principals Association. As Executive Director, Paul worked with a team of leaders to come up with a vision for improving education in Michigan by redesigning its programs and offerings to better meet the needs of African American and Latinx principal leaders in urban areas such as Detroit. Dr. Melissa Patchke, Principal of Upper Providence Elementary School in Upper Providence, Pennsylvania, is the Zone 2 representative of the National Association of Elementary School Principals Board of Directors, where she mentors great principals who are always seeking ways to be the catalyst of what's right for their students. Paul, Missy, and Chris are joined today by two guests, entrepreneur and global educator Kevin Simpson, and Yale faculty member and director of the School Initiative for the New England MHTTC, Dr. Martha Staley. I turn it now to you, Chris.
Thank you and welcome, everyone. You know, we are so pleased to be here today. And I want to just start by saying it's under much different circumstances than when Missy and Paul and I wrote our book. At that point, we really thought, wow, wouldn't it be fun to envision the future and what we might do under the best circumstances? Well, deep sigh, not quite the best right now. However, visioning remains really important, maybe even more important than before. So we are very glad you're with us. Next slide. I want to begin with a mindfulness heart beaming exercise. This heart beaming pamphlet we have is available to download from our website, the Center for Educational Improvement. I've adapted one of the exercises for today. And we realize that with all that's going on, sometimes our minds are racing and thoughts are whirling around, and it may be hard to be centered. So if you would like to close your eyes, you can, but otherwise, this will be just a brief 2-minute exercise. I want you to begin by taking a couple deep breaths. Now inhale and put your left hand over your heart and the right hand over the left. Feel the warmth of your heart, the fullness of your heart. And envision people around the world with their hands on their heart. They may be seated. However, men, women, children, everyone is meditating with their hands on their heart. Now imagine that you're sending energy from your heart to another person, and that there is a chain of energy that circles the globe. and it comes right back to you. And inhale and exhale and open your eyes. So visioning onward, what does that mean? Where does it start? Where does it go? Well, Peter Senge out of MIT has a lot to say about visioning. He said, learning is driven by vision. We believe well-being is also connected to vision. So today we want to begin by understanding where we are now. We want to use the visioning process that we developed in our book to look at how to problem solve, to research exemplars, to consider staff and student mental health needs, and to address concerns about equity and trauma, and to give you some ideas about visioning and practice. Next slide. As we approach visioning, during this time in particular, we realize sometimes it's really hard to get beyond the physical safety or remote learning. However, for us, when we first expanded out and looked at global concerns, the macro elements, we got some new ideas. Later on today, we will also look at the micro elements. And there are some exciting things happening in terms of educational practices that can become a part of your vision. So looking at the macro, Muhammad Yunus is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He developed the concept of microloans, micro banks. He talks about two competing visions right now. One is to just get back to the way things were, or secondly, to rebuild the world, to add more equity, to think about all the things we'd like to try to write, and what we can do to help each other, not just within countries, but among countries. So Kevin, we were just speaking about global trends, and you've done some globe hopping yourself. What have you learned?
Thanks, Dr. Mason. And I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to join CEI today. I've been serving on the board for some time. And Dr. Mason and I go way back, 13 years ago when I started my journey in Washington, D.C., to wanting to do more in education, wanting to do more around the world in terms of serving. I always like to start with saying I'm a kid from Flint, Michigan. And my story in the world of international education specifically has been one that's been learning to advocate for yourself, learning to advocate for others. And so I want to just share a short piece that I wrote that just sort of chronicles my journey over the last 15 years in international education. So shifting from the US to overseas. It's called Oh Say Can We See? Oh Say Can We See? In 2000, I would meet a man who looked like me. He shared that he would journey back to London after the summer. I thought and wondered, who is he? How is that possible? A lunch led to my destiny 5 years later. It was added on my to-do one-day list. Apply, wait, interview, offers, Dubai, Egypt, Laos, 3, all for me. What would I do? Where would I go? Tall, black, fly in T, heading to Vientiane to teach overseas, a first for me that I could see. KDSL to KDSL Global, what did I see? Education, the world, but not many who looked like me. Co-conspirators in my midst who believed and shared the world, 1 country to 25. In the year of Yes We Can, I would enter a land of opportunity. Wasn't that supposed to be America? I found life and made a plan in the desert. Sir, what do you do? Play basketball? Are you in the military? Is that what you see? Let me help you. What do you not think I do? Where are you from? Ah, I hear it in your voice. That from led to a distinct treatment. I was from a place where blue was respected, others were rejected. Met with, I expected an old white man. You look just like us. Welcome, brother. Who is invited? Who are you? What do you do? Oh, say, can they see? Back home, stop, pause, reflect. Body in the shy, mind on the world, the questions, the looks, not the norm. I left Dubai for this. I can't see in this land that was supposed to be for me. A lock. A turn down led to a turn up. Don't look the part. White men preferred. How do we get others to see? Speak up, amplify, research, advocate, learn, write, values, vision, mission, misaligned. Silence, silence, silence. Folks are saying they still don't see, or don't want to see. Now, statements, quotes, emails, phone calls, how are you? Be safe. So now you see, show me your commitment and new policies. Matter, collective, petitions, recruitment, accreditation, change more. Do you see? The vision started with seeing someone who looked like me. Really, it wasn't about me, but we. Oh, say, can we see?
So, Kevin, before we go on to this next slide, I'd just like to do a follow-up with you to think about all your experiences and this new organization that you've just started. And could you talk a little bit more about what you intend to accomplish with this new organization?
Definitely, Dr. Mason. So 3 years ago, what we call now ALOC, or the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color, was started as an affinity group on Facebook. And it was a place where people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color could congregate in a space, share ideas, thoughts, feelings, be open, be mad, embrace each other, find people who look like themselves around the world. And that sort of morphed into September 2019, moving into an association where we focus on amplifying the voices of people of color in international education. And our big three are advocacy, learning, and research. So as we, in this space, we've really sort of called in and called out organizations as it relates to discrimination, which we know we'll talk about later. Just in terms of things that were said to people, things that were done to people, and people just, again, I think going back to what we're talking about today is walking around with trauma. A lot of the experiences that, and the stories that I've heard from folks, it comes back to people. And our big thing is putting people first, listening to stories, honoring people where they're at, affirming them, and just knowing that there's a community there to support them.
I want to thank you for what you're doing and for all the years we've shared together. Folks, Kevin is just an amazing presenter. He really is. And I've learned a lot from him. I can remember a charter school in DC where we had high school students who were really struggling with math. And I called Kevin. I said, hey, can you come in and help? We needed to help the teachers better understand. But I also know that you've helped history teachers, right? As well.
Yeah.
So quite a comprehensive background. So as you look at everything that's going on right now, think about education in particular. And let's just start with the US, okay? What advice would you have for us?
Ooh, US. I just feel like, and I think coming back to the US, so I repatriated a few years ago, and sort of like in the piece it talks about body and the shy. So I've lived now Chicago, Los Angeles, and now based in Dallas. And this year I went back into the classroom. So this is my first year being back in the US setting classroom outside of overseas. And so much has changed. You know, I think of this generation and sort of listening to them where they're at, and the school, the set of schools that I've collaborated with, highly diverse, youth that are really active, passionate, have voice, want to make sure that their voices are known. So seeing a lot more in terms of agency, and scholars that are young, that are, you know, will initiate, you know, have ideas, that will question, that will challenge. So I'm very hopeful when it comes to that. I'm just hopeful that, you know, as we look around the US now, that we see more schools and more organizations adopting anti-racist practices, that we adopt this ability to speak up and speak out, and not fearing that there will be a loss of job, or this fear of I have to be mute. Because I just watch and see so many young people who are willing to speak up. And I'm reminded last week of, in our book club, a young lady saying that her 6-year-old felt like she had to speak up. And from her 6-year-old, this 35-year-old said, if my 6-year-old is gonna speak up, I know I have to do something. So, yeah.
So Missy or Paul, do you have a follow-up question of Kevin?
Sure, I do. I'm thinking, Kevin, as we've worked together just in this short amount of time, I respect the vision that you had, and as it connects to what we're going to be talking about, to know that somebody needed to put this collaborative together to provide a platform that had a brave space to be able to move forward. Can you speak about how, even though you didn't see necessarily the events of the past 3 months coming, but how that vision has carried you through to what you're working on today?
Yeah, thank you. I think for us, and talking to like our leadership and our advisory and our reps, it's one of those, for us, it was a moment where for us, we knew that what and the why, the why we were doing this and then what we're doing, and how we went about it. Going back to the piece with the silence. We've been, met with a lot of I call it selective silence, where people hear and see, again, it's trying to engage in conversations, but being met with like, we don't want to address that, and a lot of people saying, we know we need to do better, and saying there's an elephant in the room, where we're not afraid to have those courageous conversations, to really pull people in and say, well, when we say do better, what does that mean? And it's more than being aware. It's more than reading, it's action. And so what action are we going to take? How are we going to invest and really shift? And I think what we're starting to see are a lot of alumni, parents speak up. And again, it comes back to honoring stories and honoring people. And listening to people, where they're at. And I think that for us is one of those things that is really carrying us. And we know that, setting out to what we set up was, it was a trial, to see like, we haven't seen others do this. We see affinity spaces, but really sort of speaking up and speaking out based on what we're observing and what we're experiencing. It was time, and I think that was the big thing. It was time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go on to the next slide. So thinking now in the more global terms of reopening, looking at this list here, physical and emotional safety, staffing, technology. Paul, when you look at this list, what comes to mind?
So I've been in this work, K-12 work, particularly for the last nearly 40 years. Actually, it'll be 40 years on July the 2nd. And I've seen a lot of change over the course of time, but we have never faced challenges like we are today with COVID and equity and race relationships. And I'm encouraged by some of what I'm seeing in terms of moving us forward to get to real change. And I didn't really get a chance to ask the question, which I'll get back to for Kevin, in terms of moving us forward. But we calculated in Michigan it's going to be costing roughly $1 billion additional dollars for staffing, dealing with technology issues, adding Wi-Fi access in remote locations, providing for PPE for students and staff and teachers. And so it seems difficult to be thinking about visioning at this point in time, but it's now more important during this time than ever, because we need to vision ourselves out of this current situation to real reform. We've talked about action in the past, but never moved it forward. And now is an opportunity, the likes of which we haven't seen in the better part of 5 decades. So I'm encouraged, I'm excited about what the future is potentially going to look like. In terms of relationships, we need to really focus on relationships with families. During this past pandemic, my wife and I are grandparents of 6 grandchildren, and we had 3 in our care, 3, 6, and 8 years old. So working full time, we also had the opportunity to work 3 hours each day to school them, if you will, with support from the school district. And they did everything that they could possibly do to provide resources and support, but it was still a challenge. So a great deal of gratitude goes to principals, school workers of any sort, particularly teachers who are trying to manage their own household and their own families, and then teach any number from 20 to 30 students in a single day. So getting back to visioning. Share your vision, your ideas, your hope for the future, the next 2, 3, 5 years with everyone around you, and let it be their idea as well, because education is changed forever. We're never going back to what we experienced even 6 and 9 months ago. Mark my words. Chris?
Okay, next slide. So we have a poll question for you. We're interested in what your school or district has done with visioning. So which of these holds true for your school or district? Interesting. You know, we hear about planning. We know people are making plans, but we haven't heard a lot about the visions. However, it's our deep belief, and we hope that by the end of today's session, you'll have a better understanding why. We really believe that visions are critical for our plans. We will achieve more and be more satisfied. Teachers and others will feel more empowered if visioning becomes a part of the process. So next slide. Another poll. Okay. So now we get back to your planning, because we know most of you are engaged in some planning. So you can select all that apply here. Oh yes, and I see someone's using the chat box. That's great. So please, as we go through this webinar today, feel free to chat. We will have a time for Q&A at the end. However, your questions, your ideas will help inform what we discuss at the end. So the uncertainty, a lot of the planning is happening at the district level or the state level. And so down at the level of the schools, you may not be as informed. And not surprisingly, the focus is really on health, safety, and curriculum. These are all huge concerns. This is the logistics, right, that will keep us up and running. However, we really urge you to go back and think about the other ideas we are going to be discussing today. Next slide. So Paul Revelle, who's a professor at Harvard and has been studying equity for quite a long time and has been studying what we can do to make schools work better in the future. He says, never lose the opportunity of a crisis. Children could be learning so much more. There's so much more we could be doing to support their well-being. And even during this time of COVID, when we have some focus on the well-being, and we know from our work in New England, a lot of the people we work with there have said, you know, the well-being of children is foremost. That in fact, from that platform of security and safety and the protection that comes with a focus on well-being, students are better prepared to learn. They're better prepared for their future, and day to day, moment to moment, they can also have a better quality of life. So this focus on what can we do for the future is really important. Next slide. So Martha, I'm so glad you're with us today. And as we think of health and well-being of students, what are some of the things that we should consider?
That is a great question. In terms of the health and well-being of students, first of all, we have to have an understanding of where our students are coming from, the context in which they have been living the last 6 months or so. And so that we can think more deeply about what types of stress they might have experienced, or grief or loss over the last 6 months. That could be loss from a death due to COVID. It could be stress and trauma due to racism or racist violence. It could be the stress and loss of leaving their schools in the spring and on a Tuesday afternoon, and then not coming back until the fall, perhaps. So in terms of well-being, of course, we have to think really clearly about physical well-being, but we know that schools are places charged with so much more than that. That schools are really places where many students look for safety and security and connection and relationships, and where families also are looking for connection and relationships and guidance about how to process and move forward from these challenges.
So Martha, do you want to continue? Talk about some of the resources we have.
Sure. Well, I am the site director for the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center's School Mental Health Initiative, the Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative, which I co-direct with Christine Mason. And we have a wonderful website that is filled with resources that are specifically geared for the New England area, but will also direct you to resources for school districts across the country. And those resources are a great place to get started to look for trauma responsive and trauma informed curricula, curricular resources on equity issues and anti-racist teaching. And if you choose to join us in our Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative, we also have an online community of resources that's very vital, with lots of people contributing their ideas and strategies. So in terms of coming back to school after this long period of time where we've not only had this pandemic, but also a number of really stressful, high trauma-inducing types of experiences, it's really important for schools to think about safety and equity, and to think of equity as an issue of safety and as a component of safety. It's really important to think about how you're building your communities within schools, not only amongst your students and staff, but also with their families and with natural supports, or the types of organizations that exist within communities that students and families are already connected to. It's really important to think about who your partners in your communities might be to help support the mental health of your students and staff. So that could be your school-based mental health center, community behavioral health centers, or primary care or pediatrics practices, but also state and local resources for things like food, for financial benefits, unemployment or housing benefits. And those are sort of the basics, the underpinning of beginning to think about your staff and student mental health needs. But we know we also really need to acknowledge and address the grief. So to name it specifically as grief and stress, to talk about why that has happened, to solicit answers from your community about why that's happened, and work together as a community to move forward. And part of that is reestablishing routines and connections, the types of things that people, especially children, can rely on, a beginning and end to the school day, great relationships with staff. One of the things that we talk a lot about in the Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative, and I know that Missy, Paul, and Chris have talked a lot about in their work, is the benefits of using things like mindfulness, learning, and social and emotional learning, teaching self-regulation techniques and skills to use both at home and at school. And school is a great place to begin building those skills, both for your students and their families, but also for your staff and yourselves as also people who have experienced this trauma. And then working together to create a vision for a better future. And that is what Paul and Kevin were talking about, like this vision of hope moving forward.
Thank you, Martha. Next slide.
So as we progress and we talk about the visioning process, one of the pieces that's ingrained in the work that Chris and Paul and I did was the idea that's based on John Hattie's work from Visible Learning, which is the element of collective efficacy. When you have a full system of stakeholders that truly believe in the power of your vision, there are exponential gains that can come from that synergy. This has been proven time and time again, and we've woven this into our beliefs on the shared capacity that's important for visioning. When Kevin spoke, for example, he said that listening to those stories, honoring what each person brings to the table, and making sure you know and you are able to work with them where they are. Those are the pieces that are so critical in getting a vision to move forward. So as we progress, keep those things in mind.
So I want to remind you that we really have developed this 8-step process. It's an iterative process for visioning. We don't believe good visioning can be done in one session. And right now during this time, we really need to start with just informal discussions, family, friends, neighbors. You're probably doing some of that already. You know, what's your vision? What do you think will happen? Then you can think about a small group, a steering team, to work with you in a more formal sense and help you plan for how do you involve others in your community. How do we get this collective efficacy? And from that, you can start working with a group of people. Step 3, develop a draft. By the end of today's session, we'll show you 2 or 3 or 4 drafts. We also will give you our Visioning School Leaders Guide, and we have links at the back of this slideshow to many of the things we're recommending today. So you will be getting resources along with our more idealistic visioning session. Next slide. So we believe you're here as change agents. Right now, we need change agents. And here's a little map. So we are all engaged right now with experimenting. That's part of what's going on. Many of us are frontline responders. You know, we're not in some ivory tower. We're right there where things happen moment to moment, and we need to respond. Many of us are also visionaries. We really want what's best for children, for the world. And Kevin, how would you approach this diagram? What else could we say with everything that's here on this page?
Definitely. And one thing we want everyone to do is take a look in the middle, in the yellow part. I'm going to read each of those words to you real quickly. Inclusion, liberation, justice, solidarity, resiliency, interdependency. We want you to think in your roles, your current roles, because this process is meant to be sort of threefold: to reflect, to assess, and to plan. So if you were to pick one of those words that I just said, pick one that connects to the work that you're currently doing. Then we want you to look on the outside. There are several words on the outside that Dr. Mason was mentioning: storyteller, guides, experimenters, visionaries, caregivers. If you were to pick one of those, how do you currently show up in your role? Are you the one telling stories? Are you one challenging others, asking questions? Are you the one providing the big picture as the visionary? Then we want you to think about What roles do you feel comfortable and natural at playing, and why? And what roles make you come alive? We highly recommend that you look at this and use this as you launch into your new year, or as part of your team. It comes from Deepa Iyer. Solidarity is in the Building Movement Project. It's something you can look at as an individual, you can look at the team level, or even as an entire, a small team or a larger part of your building team. So consider that, and know that these roles might change. Know that you might play different simultaneously depending on what it is.
Okay, so as you think about visioning, a lot of times we think about visioning and we think pie in the sky, right? However, we know it needs to be grounded with realism. It needs to be practical. We want inclusive visions, not just for those who have the most resources, right? But consider everyone. Your vision is going to need some flexibility, partly because of the times we're in, right? We don't really know what's coming next. So you have to be able to adapt. However, we know if you're bold, you have a greater chance of achieving something. And of course, empathy and compassion, those are really key to mental health and well-being. Next slide. So Paul, what does Eric Wallach have to say?
So his focus is on consideration of transgenerational thinking, in that we need to be thinking about what the next generation will be facing, both in terms of economy, science, technology, education, healthcare, and plan forward. His futures thinking is related to planning and strategizing around policy and executing via that policy to make lasting change. So often we go through spurts of conversation about change, and we have a difficult time moving into action. I'm encouraged by hearing from Kevin and certainly from Melissa about their personal experiences, which is why telling the story, describing what the future can look like, that best case scenario, will help motivate people forward in terms of both their thinking and action. So the ultimate aim is consideration of what will come after. What will come after COVID-19? What will come after the challenges that we've faced with racism and our struggle in our anti-racist movement? And why are we having that struggle? What can we do to get to long and lasting change? Those are considerations that we have to think about while we're developing our vision. Chris?
Let's go to the next slide. We started today with a mindfulness exercise. We just want to remind you, as you do visioning, to be mindful, to be aware of your own emotions and feelings, what's happening around you, how other people are feeling, your stakeholders, people you're trying to impact, what's going on in their lives. So consider that. Take a few deep breaths, really get into your body, out of your head, be with your breath, which can calm you. And in this time of high anxiety, calmness is important. We also know that if you move your body, sometimes it's easier to meditate. If you sit down and you're just going to empty your mind, sometimes that's really tough. But if you move around a little bit first and then focus on just being still and observing what comes to you and then letting go, you can be more centered. And this is part of our heart-centered approach, where we think about consciousness, being aware of others, compassion, the empathy, and building community. Next slide.
So here we go. We're headed into next fall, and depending on where you are in the country, that could only be a few short weeks away. There are many concerns as we're heading in, and different things that we're hearing across multiple platforms. In our chat feature, I already saw that there were comments about budget, about transportation. about parental concerns that are going to be impacting what we as educators do and are able to provide. All of those pieces are real, and they are potential boundaries that we're going to hit. One of the pieces that, as you're doing your planning and as you're doing your own work as school leaders or school influencers, keep in mind that resiliency and that flexibility, adaptability that Chris just mentioned is going to be highly, highly valuable coming into an unknown school year. In addition, if there was ever a time to embark with emotional intelligence and to make sure that that human intuitive that you've all learned through your profession and through your work with people needs to be on point. There will be so many different emotions that you deal and multiple plans that will come out at you as a system and you as an individual. So make sure that you're considering the human factor, those life skills right in front of you as you move forward with the directions that we're given.
So we're going to skip over this one just for the sake of time, but I want to tell you, Rudy Kimmy is a professor at a university in Cape Town, South Africa. So this advice comes from him. And just look at this, you know, thinking about collaboration, problem solving, resiliency, a lot of the things that we talk about here, people are talking about globally. Next slide. When we think about families, and we know that children are home with parents day in and day out right now, that there are some families that function very well and things are going pretty smoothly. However, that's not every child, that's not every family. And so what we need to do is be mindful, again, that kids and families are in different places, have different needs. And Paul, what would you say about resiliency?
So we are the poster family for experiencing dysfunction in our family with two of us working and having three littles and trying to manage school along with work. And so we practiced mindfulness at the end of every day. We had a family meeting, and that helped us get stabilized, if you will, for the next day. It helped us learn how to cope with the challenges that each of us brought to the experience, and also helped us to build resiliency. So I tell you that because that's our story. And it's not unlike families across the entire country that have faced challenges and dysfunction on a daily basis. But we need to have tools. We need to share those tools with others so they can begin to practice them. Because the results for us were remarkable. From dysfunction to a great deal of habit building, and quite frankly, improved quality of life for all of us.
Next slide. So Martha, let's turn again to trauma and let's consider the impact.
So we talk a lot about trauma in the work that we do with my group at Yale and in this Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative. And usually what we're talking about, or prior to this current crisis, we were talking about adverse childhood experiences and the types of trauma that we as educators are used to encountering in our work with children and in schools. So we have on the left the model of what has happened with children who have experienced trauma, a divorce by their parents, violence, an illness. What happens after children are exposed to trauma, we know, we've seen it sometimes in our own families, sometimes in our students, is that fear, anxiety, and depression is heightened. The symptoms of those types of problems, fear, anxiety, and depression are heightened. And that leads to children having difficulty regulating emotions and behavior, learning, and interpersonal relationships. Those of us who are trauma-informed, trauma and responsive know that you can't just look at that bottom circle, the difficulty regulating emotions and behavior, without considering the things that might have led up to that. What's new in this situation is that you have those children who have experienced those ACEs or other types of issues. But now all of those things have been magnified by this broader context within the spring, the pandemic, the disruptions, the violence and injustice that is being discussed more openly and honestly in this country, the health and safety concerns that many families have, the disparities that have existed within this pandemic and that are being brought to light with disparate exposure to illness and trauma, and fear about the future. And that's not only happening to our students, it's happening within us. It's happening within us as parents and families, with our kids, among our staff. And that's really important to understand. But what we want to also understand is that schools play a really important role in helping build resiliency and helping to mitigate some of those traumas that children and our staff have experienced, that we have experienced. So next slide. So we think it's really important not only to focus on the trauma and to be aware of that, especially as you are making plans for the future, being responsive to trauma, being flexible, as all of those things that Missy talked about. But that's not the end of the story. If we are thinking about building schools to be compassionate and responsive to the needs of children and the other people within our school community, we have to take a multi-pronged approach to helping children and the adults around us become healthier. So we have to reduce the causes of stress and trauma at home and in society and school as much as we possibly can. We have to support children individually, recognizing where kids are at, what resources we might be able to bring to bear. We have to develop protective factors, so bringing in families and parents, building up those family and community connections. And we have to help kids have a greater sense of agency. We have to increase that in ourselves, learn new skills, whether it's mindfulness, like the great family meetings that Paul was talking about, or whether it is employing anti-racist educational practices. All of those types of things, those discussions build resiliency, and these things together help us move forward in the right direction. And those are all things that we have to think about as we're building our visions, as we're going through the visioning process, is to think about these different ways that we can help children and our staffs build resiliency in terms of their own health.
I'd like to let you know that there is a real connection between the compassionate mental health model that Martha just presented and what we call the 5 C's of heart-centered learning, which are consciousness, compassion, confidence, courage, and community. I'll talk about those in a minute. However, important elements include competent, caring leaders, self-care, the connections between home and school, and making sure that staff are well informed, that there is some mental health literacy, professional development going on. Because, as we found out, many schools and teachers don't know about the neurobiology of trauma. They don't know particularly about the little things they could do that might make a huge difference for kids going through trauma. Next slide.
So I'm going to emphasize for the group that self-care component. Chris, you said it so well. Sometimes the smallest pieces are the most meaningful. And for those of us listening today, whether you're a leader of schools or you have another role that you play, but you will lead and influence others in some manner, be sure to be consistently checking in with those that you serve, with your students, with your families. But do check in with yourself as well. Oftentimes, we are the people that don't have somebody beside us, making sure that we're checking in. So that self-care component, if you take care of you, then there's no question that you can be there for them, whoever them is for you. So take that seriously. Write down something in your area that after this webinar, you're going to go do for yourself. You need to take care of yourself.
So I just want to say, all that we've been talking about really ties with our vision for heart-centered learning. Now, we started with the meditation with your hands over your heart. There's science actually that supports the notion that if you put your hands physically on your heart, you can pull yourself back down to your heart and your body. And you can feel more compassion and empathy just by doing that simple movement. We believe that mindful awareness of others is really the platform for everything that comes for this community building. And thinking about our communities, whether we're in one physical building or a community connected virtually, is really critical during this time. Next slide. So here's some other considerations. I think we've talked a lot about most of these. Just remember that there are things that you can do to increase a sense of trust, a sense of choice, to have better collaboration and more emotional safety. These are really critical right now. Next slide. And this is just our reminder, even though it's really tough, take the time to check in with your hopes and your dreams and be that optimistic leader that people really need right now. Next slide. Okay, we have a tool to help you out, and we actually tomorrow will have a tutorial on this tool, and there'll be another one coming up in a matter of weeks. Let us know if you want to participate tomorrow. Dana's going to be leading this. This tool was validated on 814 educators. It was an independent study, and we believe it has great relevance for today. Next slide. So when you get your slides set, you can look at this more closely. We'll give you the link. But we have items related to alleviating trauma, and we also have things related to equity. So two of our major concerns right now are part of this instrument. Mindfulness is there. Looking at the neurobiology of trauma are all there. The instrument takes 12 to 15 minutes to complete. It's 40 items, and it's a self-assessment. It's online. You can get results pretty quickly. We believe it's a good basis for collecting your baseline so you can get an idea of where you are right now, and it will help later with progress monitoring. Next slide. We just want to remind you, we've been showing you exemplars. One of our steps is to research the exemplars. You know, sometimes we do that researching by going inside, looking at people inside our community, our schools, and talking with them. Like, what really works for you? What would you like to see? That's good. That's part of it. However, the other part is looking out, getting examples from around the world, from some of the leading scientists, some of the leading educators. We're doing part of that for you today, but we encourage you to keep that process going as you develop your visions. Next slide. Okay, a poll for you. This will help inform what we do with the remaining time we have today. So select your top two. What do you think is going to be most valuable? Okay, well, Martha, it looks like we're spot on. Looking at mental health and trauma. This is what we do in New England. We're most concerned about that. So it's reassuring to us to know that you too are concerned about trauma. But I also am pleased to see that you're looking at other countries and you're looking at families. Very, very critical during this time. Okay, next slide. And over this, in interest of time, we know that schools can be built back better, even with all the obstacles. And here are some of the things to consider. Next slide. Paul, what do you want to say about this?
So, as you're well aware, the gap, the academic gap, has grown over the course of the last 6 months pretty dramatically for our children in poverty, our children of color, but especially for our special needs students. because it's very difficult to provide supports for many of our special needs students remotely. So our encouragement to you as school leaders and organization leaders is to ensure equity in fiscal policies, because legislation is still being passed. Legislators are still at work at the state level. And we really have to concentrate on meeting basic needs, including food and healthcare, providing summer meals, not just at the end of the school year, but through the summer as we return or hope to return face-to-face in some fashion. We need to provide access to mental health supports through the summer, but we also have to help parents get access to those resources. Let's build a map, a roadmap with phone numbers and identifying exactly how parents can get access to their kids' needs. The gap grows, and it's our responsibility to mitigate the gap growth, that damage. And then this summer, we've been working on a continuity of learning plan in Michigan. We've delivered that to parents and school leaders. We're focused on health and phys ed over the summer with some guidance and practice activities, and developed a rural, urban, and suburban back to school work group, and with some focus on how we work to support our special needs students in a bigger and better way. Chris?
Thank you. Next slide. Missy.
Yeah. So our special education resources have truly been something that over the shutdown across the country have been under question. Many of our most vulnerable students have lost some of the things that keep them essentially working, but they're also children oftentimes that we need to medically protect in some ways. So I think that the message here is, if you read this, is about thinking outside the box, how to come up with ideas to support children, things that are good for all children, but especially those that need our supports the most in a different way. Next slide. So as we're considering that, UDL is Universal Design for Learning. And if you're familiar with the practices, it basically challenges us as educators to consider not just what our special needs population needs, but what could we do for all children? How could we adapt planning and designs so that all children can benefit, and of course our special needs populations benefit within that core? So with the pandemic and the COVID shutdowns and all that, we're looking to go back into whatever school looks like for you in the fall, keep these things in mind. So when we're talking about accommodation, what can we do to help all learners? But with that as well is the importance of going back to that collective efficacy, hearing from the people that can tell you the best and with the most authenticity what's going to work. And that's your instructional staff. Make sure those teachers have a voice, make sure they have professional development that they need, and the tools and resources that they're asking for. They're the people that know the children, they know their families, and they're going to be able to tell you on an individual basis how you can meet the requirements, whatever it is you're facing.
Paul.
So we're focused on providing resources via the web and delivering materials, including packets and science materials, to the home over the course of the next several months, again, to try to engage kids in a bigger and different way. And so we're spending resources, that is dollars and in human resources to that end, and developing plans for the fall start in case we have a blended model of back to school or quite frankly, a full-blown learning at a distance model in play. And so we're encouraging teachers to allow their individual students to teach a class and get prepared for that. We did a little bit of practice with that in our home with the great staff from Bloomfield Hills Public Schools in southeast suburban Detroit, Michigan. And it was both remarkable and motivating for the students, not just for the students presenting, but for the entire class. Considering virtual experiments, taking kids on virtual tours all over the world. We have access to places all over the world. I have a conversation with my son, who's the Inspector General of U.S. Air Force in South Korea. I speak to him every day. He's on the other side of the world, and he's sharing intel and information with our family and our kids and our children's classes at a distance. So anything goes. Use whatever innovative idea that you can come up with. Give it a try, and allow your teachers to fail. As Melissa said, allow them some latitude, right? It's really more important about taking care of their mental, physical health, their social, emotional balance than the rigor of academics. That comes second. Start with first things first.
Yeah. Chris, can I add in also, one of the things that most school systems are looking at is the fluidity between having to open a certain way, possibly respond very quickly to a closure, and then restart in another way. So a lot of what Paul just talked about, if we can think about what can we do in a face-to-face situation that can transition and partner with our technology components that would allow children and classrooms to have that consistent flow no matter where we are. Those types of experiences are going to be invaluable for this coming school year.
One thing I want to hop in and say, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
I'm a huge advocate for accountability and for rigor, right? As Chris hears me often say, social emotional learning is not about a big group hug. It's about building resilience and passion and compassion and caring for others. But rigor is part of that. And we're getting a lot of pushback from legislators and the community about our academic delivery of content is not being as rigorous as it should be. And my pushback is, again, first things first, let's take care of the whole child. Let's think about their mental health, their physical health, before we talk about increasing rigor and assessment.
And one thing I wanted to add too is going back on that higher order thinking online and that voice piece that Missy talked about was 2 questions we asked our scholars right when we jumped into online learning was, number 1, what do you think you need to learn between now and the end of the academic year? And number 2, who do you want to hear from? And from that emerged a list from doctors to lawyers to people in the community who were working doing work right with COVID. And we were able to assemble, community members from local nonprofits, lawyers who were the government stage, doctors who were engaged in this work. And it was pretty powerful to see. So they got a chance to see that their voices mattered, their voices were front and center and things that they want to hear and see, because assessments were suspended. And technically we were about to prep for, in Texas, the Texas assessment. So while that was suspended, that was the angle we took, and just the educators and the people from around the world we were able to engage the scholars with was just amazing. So in the kind of engagement that they had, the questions they asked, and just what they want to know, that really drove a big piece of the online program that we set up.
Thank you. Next slide. So Paul, let's think about virtual reality. How can that inform what we do?
So my top 8: promote curiosity and wonder, develop empathy for others in crisis, allow for kids to understand how people are suffering all over the world, not just here in the United States, but all over the world, and not just from COVID-19. There's so many challenges around the world related to poverty and starvation. But take kids on a virtual travel to explore those places, engage them in time travel, past and future, make history come alive, explore the human body, oceans, outer space, experience different careers firsthand, as Kevin just spoke of. Kids are learning from the experts about what goes on a daily basis in many careers, and that motivates them to want to work harder, learn more to get to that end. Discover how virtual learning is used in medicine, or virtual reality is used in medicine, engineering, and entertainment. In Michigan, we now have a virtual welding course. It is absolutely amazing. You would say it's very difficult for someone to learn to virtually weld. I'm a welder. I grew up on a farm, so I'm an experienced welder. And I said, there's no way that could work. Hey, guess what? It is working incredibly well. And then finally, students can create their own virtual content, developing their own system that they can share with other students. It's motivating for them and for their peers.
Thank you. Next slide. So, wow, visioning, back to visioning. So we've given you macro elements and micro. We thought about what global thought leaders are saying, as well as what do we do with special ed? What do we do with higher order thinking? And now we want to take you back to some of the things we wrote about. In our book, when we talk about visioning and vision statements, these are some criteria we give you. We get these criteria from looking at places like Microsoft, and Apple, Starbucks. Keep it present tense. That makes it real. Use inspiration. That's that idealism, that gets to us. Make it vivid so you can, again, feel it, touch it. And see if you can evoke emotion with what you do. Next slide.
Chris, before you jump, it's imperative that your mission statement evokes emotion, right? It needs to tell a story about what your hope is for the future. And if it evokes emotion, it will be remembered and it won't be shelved.
So in our book, we give you some examples of what to do with visioning. We talk about Steve Jobs and visionaries. Who are your visionaries? Who would you add to that list? And if you give yourself and your staff permission to dream, what would you come up with? Write it down and see where that takes you. Okay, Kevin, in our book, close to the very end, we have a little statement from you, from your work. And so now we turn to you as we get close to the end of this formal part of the presentation. And we ask you, what advice would you give us? What questions would you ask of us?
Thanks, Dr. Mason. And I think going back to, dreaming and sort of big picture and what Paul and you were saying, I think for us at ALOC, our big sort of dream and big mission is all encompassed in what we call our International Educator Equity Statement. And so that's a bold, big statement around what we as a collective international education community should be doing, thinking, being, how should we be treating others in various countries where we are guests in most situations. And one of our biggest is, not waiting any longer, but speaking up about about racism and all forms of discrimination in international education. It's about challenging, it's about allying, it's about being anti-racist. And so I think when I look through these questions, is it going to be worth it? Is it worth it? It is worth it, because again, it's calling us out collectively, calling us in. Like I said, the timing for us, we started 3 years ago, not knowing what would transpire globally. When you have all states and 18 plus countries engaged in speaking out and speaking for racial justice to be the way forward and honoring people, that says a lot. And for us, leadership is, constantly looking and seeking who are those voices and asking those questions as the table is being built, really, who's included, who's excluded. And we ask that often. We look at, who's writing, who's speaking, who's not speaking, and who is at that decision-making stage that sort of felt like, oh, I could leave someone out. So we push forth and we challenge those people in those different situations. And for us, when we think about the vision and what it'll look like and how to impact, we look and see and know that it's a group now we're working with called Decolonization of the IB. And these are two young scholars. They're alumni of the International Bachelor Program, and they are calling the IB out, literally. And they have a massive force on their side now. And they came to us and said, hey, we see what you all are doing. We want to partner. We want to learn more around advocacy. And for us, that's what it's about. It's about scholars, their voices, them challenging, them questioning, and them sort of pushing what they see and what could be.
So I just want to take a minute and recognize some of the things I learned when I spent some time in India. So before we get to this slide, just want to say in India, when I was working with teachers and educators, so much of what they did was impacted by the British imperialism and the limits that placed on their thinking, just because people had told them to think this way and hadn't really given them permission, even during the school day, right, to do more than what was said. You will do this in this way, in a lockstep way. And we worked some to try to lift the veil. And it's a long-term proposition, but a really important one. So we want to give you some sample vision statements. Lifting the veil may be one of them. This is from the Agora classrooms in the Netherlands. And this project was started in 2014. And it's actually a school where kids hang out. And they have various opportunities to check in with each other, to use social media, to self-design projects. And when it first started, people said, you know what, this is not going to meet our criteria, right? You're not doing things the way they need to be done. Well, they proved it can be done. So self-determination, choice, and the efficacy of talking with students and helping them design their own environments is really critical. So when we think about space and what the space will look like for students in the future, what will schools really look like when we get beyond next fall, right? Next fall is kind of this pivotal emergency provision time, right? A transition time. There's going to be something beyond that. So start to think about what else could happen. Paul, why don't you take this one?
So the vision of the future of education coming from the Learning Council looks much like futurists have described it. We tend not to think that way. However, generally speaking, we tend to go to work and do our jobs, but don't see sort of what's happening before our very eyes. Think about the flip phone. No, think about the bag phone. Many of you are too young for that. I had a bag phone in my car. That was my first cellular phone. And then I got the flip phone. I thought I was it with a flip phone. And now I have a 10X and I'm ready to buy the next iteration of Apple's device. Think about how life has changed before us and how it's impacted our very thinking and our very work. So we need to be thinking that way about education, right? And playing a role in that thinking, in that change. Think about personal learning challenges and then personal pursuits and growing metacognition, the thinking about thinking, helping learners think about how they process information, language, and so on. And then we need to think about what will happen with STEM and STEAM in the future. It's changing pretty rapidly. And then think about how we include student voice, about what they want to learn. You heard Kevin speak about his scholars. They're really motivated because they're passionate about their work. We need to make that same pathway available to every kid in the country, every student in the country, from kindergarten through post-secondary. Chris?
So hopefully you've gotten a few ideas from us today. So we cobbled together a vision statement that we think reflects some of what we've been talking about. It starts with school as a foundational support to families and children. Schools that embed compassion, self-care, equity, and justice, that help to alleviate trauma and promote cognition, that would be the executive functioning, right? As well as academic learning. Paul, do you want to take the rest of it?
Well, safety is foremost. That's what I'm hearing about from my peers, executive directors, and superintendents across the country. Safety is the biggest concern as we get back to school. So short-term visioning is about school safety. But beyond that, we need to be thinking about how we connect classrooms virtually. That includes everything from hotspots on school buses to new cell towers, and putting more devices in the hands of children across the country. And then thinking about how we advance, again, student metacognition that will lead to resiliency, courage, And then sensitivity, sensitivity to race issues, to concerns of their peers of color, and to special needs students. Compassion, resilience, courage, metacognition.
So here's the short version. Okay, through connecting, we know that that sense of belonging is really critical. Compassion, self-care means, you know, you have to figure out what to do to keep yourself calm, right? To make sure that your anxiety and your sense of uncertainty, your fear even for the future, isn't really clouding your judgment. Student metacognition, so helping students consider, how do they learn best, right? What do they like about learning? What would they want to do if they could do anything to promote their own learning? What do they know about themselves? And then fostering that sense of community. And I don't know if you're like me, you know, sometimes I get tired of these Zoom meetings, but there's other times I see someone I haven't seen for a while, or someone I see week after week, you know, even Martha, you know, we're in meetings a couple times a week, and yet I see her online, and yet, hey, there's Martha. You know, it's just such a sense of, yes, I'm part of something bigger, right? I've got a friend, a colleague, someone I know cares about me, and someone I can care about. That sense of community is important. All those things help to reduce trauma, enhance learning, and if in an inclusive environment, we have a better sense of equity, well-being, and resiliency, that ability to bounce back, because we know life will keep happening. So we need to do what we can to prepare ourselves and others for whatever comes next. So I just want to leave you with 2 or 3 things, and then we'll get to our open dialogue. So we have a couple companion books that go along with our visioning book. We give you one compassion exercise. This is the treasure chest exercise. It's pretty simple. So you can read through it, but essentially you give students a chance to write down stories of compassion. We put them in a treasure chest, either virtual or real, and periodically pull one out, read it, think about it. What are the implications? And give the class a chance to reflect, to consider, like, wow, if that could happen, if that happened, what would our world be like if we had more compassion? These feed into vision statements of others. At the very last chapter of our book, we have a quotation from Ivan Sellers, who is an international figure in weaving mindfulness beyond classrooms and educators into communities. He has a new website, The Soul of Education Initiative. And what he says is that we can collaborate together to share, to explore, to redefine the core, the purpose of education. And by doing that, we can create more responsible, connected, sustainable, and ethically based societies. So there's a big, broad look at education. Next slide. Here's one last look at a global statement of education for Education 2030. It's for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, for an inclusive and sustainable future. Here's the word curiosity again. Students will need to develop curiosity, imagination, resilience, and self-regulation. To care about the well-being of friends and families, their communities, and the planet. It's a tall order. Here are some resources to help you. And next slide. I want to remind you, in addition to our resources and everything you're going to get including our leader's guide that goes with this session, that you have the opportunity to join Basecamp, which is our online platform. And you can join special interest centers. And it's pretty simple. So we will be sending a follow-up. Dana, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. Anyone who attended this webinar will be sent a link to optionally join the Basecamp platform. And you can not only access archived resources that are organized based on topics such as those listed on the slide, you can also ask questions, and we have a team of researchers who will look for the answers to those. For example, one person at the webinar asked for some specific resources. Those are the types of questions we can help support you with. So please do give it a try, and we hope to see you there.